The day I walked in on my wife and my best friend, my world didn't shatter, no, it burned. But instead of letting the flames consume me, I stood in the ashes and smiled. Because that was the day I realized something far more powerful than love, or friendship, or even trust. I realized the power of patience. She thought she had won. He thought he had stolen everything from me. But neither of them knew the storm I was about to unleash. If you enjoy tales of betrayal, and revenge served colder than ice, make sure you stay with me until the end. This is the story of how my wife's lies and my best friend's betrayal turned into the cruelest lesson they'll ever learn, why they both fear me now. I never believed in fairy tales, but for a long time, I thought I had found something close. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the life I once lived, and the man I was before everything changed. I was married for nearly 15 years. 15 years of my life that, at the time, I would have sworn were built on loyalty, devotion, and unshakable trust. My wife Clara was the center of my world. I worked hard to give her the life she wanted. Long hours at the office, saving for vacations, buying her gifts just to see her smile. Every time I came home late, exhausted but satisfied that I was doing right by her, she would greet me with a kiss, a plate of dinner, and words of reassurance. You work too hard, but I'm proud of you. And then there was Daniel, my best friend, my brother in all but blood. We had grown up together, scraped our knees on the same sidewalks, fought bullies side by side, shared secrets, failures, dreams. He was the man I trusted more than anyone. Clara and Daniel even got along. Too well, I would come to realize. But back then I thought it was perfect. My wife and my best friend laughing together at the dinner table, both of them encouraging me when I was too stressed, both of them promising me they had my back. How could I have known that the laughter was hiding something sharp? That their encouragement was a mask? Life was busy but comfortable. My career was stable, our house was something we had built together, and on the surface we looked like the couple people envied. Sometimes friends would say, "You two are the example of what marriage should be." I'd laugh, a little embarrassed, but proud inside. If only they had seen the shadows creeping in behind the curtains. The first red flags were small. Clara's phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was suddenly glued to her hand. A password appeared where there never was one. She started going out with friends more often, dressing up a little more than usual. When I asked, she brushed it off. "You're overthinking, honey. I just need time with the girls. You work so much. I can't just sit at home all the time." Her logic made sense, so I didn't argue. Why would I? I trusted her. Daniel, too, began to change in subtle ways. He called less often, stopped showing up for our usual Friday night drinks. When I'd ask, he'd mutter something about work or about being tired. I missed my friend, but I understood. Life gets busy. Still, something about the way he avoided eye contact unsettled me. I buried that feeling, though. After all, this was Daniel, the one person I'd never doubt. Weeks turned into months, and the distance grew. Clara smiled less at me, laughed less with me. Our conversations shrank to small talk, her phone lighting up more often than her eyes when I entered the room. I told myself marriage had its ups and downs, that maybe we were in a rut. I tried harder. Date nights, surprise flowers, even a weekend getaway. She smiled, played along, even kissed me the way she used to. But it felt rehearsed, hollow. One night, I woke to find her whispering on the phone in the bathroom. At first I thought it was one of her friends, but her voice was softer, almost trembling with excitement. She laughed, a laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. My chest tightened. I listened, straining, but the words were muffled. When I confronted her, she waved it off. "It was just Sarah. She's going through something. Don't worry about it." She crawled back into bed, kissed my cheek, and fell asleep. Or pretended to. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, something cold settling in my gut. Doubt is poison. It seeps into every thought, every glance, every touch. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the unease gnawed at me. I noticed more things, how Daniel's name came up in conversation less, yet somehow he felt ever present. How Clara grew nervous when I suggested we invite him over. How his car, once parked outside my place on casual visits, was nowhere to be seen anymore. Then came the night that changed everything. I had worked late, again. By the time I drove home, it was close to midnight. Our driveway was empty. Clara had said she'd be out with her friends. I thought nothing of it until I noticed something. A car parked a few houses down, familiar, too familiar. My chest tightened as I slowed the car, my eyes tracing the outline. Daniel's car. I parked quietly, heart hammering, and walked toward the house. The living room was dark, but a sliver of light glowed from the bedroom window upstairs. Our bedroom, the one Clara and I shared. I can't describe the sound my heart made in that moment. A dull, heavy crack, like the slow splitting of wood under pressure. My hand shook as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Every footstep up the stairs was a war between hope and dread. Maybe he was just here to talk. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe. The truth doesn't wait for maybes. When I opened the bedroom door, the world I knew ended. Clara, Daniel, together, twisted in the sheets that once smelled of us, now reeking of betrayal. Their faces when they saw me, shock, guilt, fear, are burned into me like scars. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I simply looked at them, looked at the woman I had given everything to, and the friend I had trusted more than anyone. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. The man who loved them both died in that room. The man who replaced him was patient, cold, calculating. They thought I would scream, fight, throw punches, storm out. That's what guilt prepares you for. What it doesn't prepare you for is silence. I left the room without a word, their gasps trailing behind me like ghosts. I walked out of the house, into the night air, and let the rage burn quietly. It didn't consume me. It forged me. Because revenge, I realized, is not taken in anger. It's taken in silence, in patience, in the slow turning of gears until the trap is ready to snap shut. And in that moment, I vowed they would both pay. Not with blood, not with screams, but with fear. The kind of fear that lingers, that rots from the inside, that makes them wake up at night, drenched in sweat, wondering when the shadow of their betrayal will finally strike. That night, my story truly began. When you catch betrayal in the act, you'd think the worst part is the moment you see it with your own eyes. But that's not true. The worst part is the days after, the silence, the pretending, the waiting for them to confess when deep down, you already know they never will. That night, the night I found Clara and Daniel tangled in the sheets of my bed, I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw him out or demand she pack her things. No, I walked away. And in doing so, I gave them something more terrifying than confrontation. I gave them uncertainty. I could feel it, the moment I left the room. Their whispers, their scrambling to make sense of my silence. The fear in their voices carried through the walls. They expected me to explode. Instead, I left them wondering what I'd do next. And that, I realized, was my weapon. But silence is a blade with two edges. It cuts them, yes, but it also cuts you. And in the days that followed, the wound bled inside me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Her hands on him, his lips on her. The laughter that once belonged to me, stolen and fed to my so-called best friend. Clara tried to play normal. The morning after, she made coffee, set the table, asked how I'd slept. Her voice trembled just enough to betray her nerves. I looked at her, studied her face, every twitch, every blink. It was almost amusing. She was terrified, but trying to act like nothing had happened. I said nothing. I drank the coffee, smiled faintly, and left for work. That silence was poison to her. Days stretched on. Daniel avoided me completely. No texts, no calls, no casual drop-ins. He vanished from my world, except I knew where to find him. I knew his routines, his habits. I didn't need him to speak to know everything he was doing. Meanwhile, Clara grew restless. She hovered around me more, forced smiles, tried to spark conversations. Once, she even touched my hand and whispered, "You've been so quiet lately. Is something wrong?" "Something wrong." I nearly laughed in her face. But I didn't. I just looked at her, let the silence stretch until her hand slipped from mine, cold and awkward. That was the first crack in her mask. The second came a week later. I found her in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent. She didn't notice me at first, so I leaned against the doorway, listening. I don't know what he's thinking. He hasn't said a word. I can't tell if he knows or if he's just... She froze when she saw me. Ended the call abruptly. Forced a smile. That was just Sarah. Sarah again. Her imaginary shield. I said nothing. Just walked past her, close enough that she felt the chill of my silence. She didn't follow. That night I lay awake listening to her breathing. Shallow, uneven. She was awake too. I could feel her staring at me in the dark, waiting for me to speak. I never did. You see, betrayal doesn't die in one moment. It festers. It spreads. It infects everything. I started seeing them everywhere. Not just in my house, but in my memories. Every smile Daniel gave me. Every laugh Clara shared. Every moment I once treasured. I began to question them all. Had they been laughing at me all along? Whispering behind my back while I trusted them? The weight of it crushed me. There were nights I sat in my car, parked miles from home, just gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying not to scream. My world had collapsed, but I couldn't let them see me break. Because breaking would give them victory, so instead, I watched. I started tracking Clara's routines. The late-night girls' nights that always ended too late. The mysterious errands. The sudden need to clear her head. Each time I noted the times, the excuses, the way her eyes darted when she lied. And Daniel, I watched him too. His car parked near places Clara claimed to be. His sudden absences from the bar we once frequented. Once I even followed him. He didn't notice me trailing a few cars behind. He pulled into a quiet street, parked. Minutes later, Clara's car arrived. I watched as she stepped out, hair done, lips painted. The version of herself I hadn't seen in months. She got into his car, and there, under the dim streetlights, I watched them kiss. I should have snapped. Should have dragged him from the car and ended it right there. But I didn't. Instead, I memorized it, burned it into my mind, because patience was stronger than rage. Rage would end quickly. Patience would destroy them. From that night on, I became a ghost in my own life. I smiled when needed, worked when expected, but inside I was sharpening my blade. Every lie she told me, I tucked away. Every secret meeting they thought was hidden, I recorded. Messages, calls, financial transactions. Piece by piece, I built a web. Clara began to notice. My silence was no longer just unnerving. It was suffocating. She'd snap at me over small things, then apologize quickly as if afraid I'd erupt. But I never did. That was the beauty of it. She didn't know when or if the explosion was coming. One evening she broke. "Why won't you just talk to me?" She shouted, her voice cracking. "You sit there like a stranger. If something's wrong, say it." I looked at her, let the silence stretch, then finally spoke. The first real words I'd given her in weeks. "Nothing's wrong, Clara." The way her face paled at those words. It was better than any scream, because she knew I was lying. And the fact that she couldn't tell what I really knew, that terrified her more than the truth ever could. As for Daniel, he stayed away. But I made sure he felt me. Little reminders. Anonymous calls that hung up the moment he answered. A text from an unknown number. I know. A shadow of my car a few blocks away from his office. Nothing obvious. Nothing direct. Just enough to make him sweat. Betrayal had broken me. But now I was learning something new. Something sharper. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the storm they didn't see coming, and the best part, they still thought they were in control. That illusion wouldn't last much longer, because if part 1 of my story was trust, and part 2 was betrayal, then part 3 would be the plan, the beginning of their end. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't end when you catch them. That's just the beginning. The real ending comes when you decide what to do with the pieces they've left you in. Most men would have screamed, fought, divorced her, fought him. That would have been too easy for them. It would have given them closure, maybe even pity. But I didn't want pity. I didn't want closure. I wanted fear, and fear requires patience. I started by making myself small, forgettable, harmless. At home, I smiled. I nodded. I even pretended to laugh when Clara forced her little jokes. I played the role of the tired husband, too busy, too distracted to notice. She relaxed, little by little, though the cracks in her mask never fully disappeared. With Daniel, I vanished completely. No calls, no texts, no confrontation. He might have thought I was avoiding him out of shame, humiliation, or heartbreak. Let him think that. The weaker they thought I was, the stronger I became. Invisible men are dangerous, because nobody sees them coming. Patience gave me time to dig. And what I found was a gold mine. Clara had grown sloppy. Maybe she thought I was blind. Maybe she believed her lies. Or maybe she was just reckless in her arrogance. I found messages on her laptop, hidden but not deleted. The words were sharp daggers. I can't wait until it's just us. He'll never see it coming. I feel alive with you, not with him. Each one a betrayal. Each one a spark to fuel the fire inside me. With Daniel, it was easier. He had always trusted me with too much. His finances, his business ventures, his secrets. All it took was a little digging, some calls to people we both knew, and suddenly I had a clear picture. His company wasn't as stable as he pretended. He was leveraged to the teeth, desperate for deals to keep him afloat. I printed everything, messages, bank records, photos I took of their secret meetings, Clara slipping into his car, the two of them holding hands like teenagers. I created a file so thick it could bury them both, and I kept it hidden. Not to use yet, but to remind myself that I held the knife, and I hadn't twisted it. Yet fear grows best in silence, but it thrives in isolation. I began pulling the strings quietly. Clara loved her friends, the gossip, the attention. I fed her lies gently, suggesting that certain people were talking about her behind her back. I'd leave notes she'd written to herself in places they didn't belong, implying she was forgetful, losing grip. Her paranoia grew. She snapped at her friends, withdrew, accused them of things they hadn't done. Slowly her circle shrank. Daniel was easier. A whisper here, a suggestion there. A failed deal because someone pulled out at the last second, and I was the reason. A rumor spread in the right ear about him being untrustworthy, reckless. Soon his phone stopped ringing with opportunities. His name lost its shine in the community we once shared. They didn't realize it yet, but the walls were closing in. And I was the architect. What made it delicious was the near misses, the moments where they almost realized I was pulling the strings. One evening, Clara stormed into the living room, waving her phone. "Why did you send this?" she demanded. It was a photo. A blurry shot of her and Daniel at a cafe, his hand brushing hers across the table. The sender's number? Blocked. I looked at her, calm, sipping my drink. "What are you talking about?" Her hands shook as she stared at me, searching my face for a crack, a tell. But I gave her nothing. Eventually she backed down, muttering something about spam or a mistake. But the seed of fear had been planted. Daniel, too, felt it. Once I accidentally bumped into him at a store. He froze, guilt flashing in his eyes. I smiled, clapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Long time, huh?" His laugh was hollow, forced. He left quickly, his hands trembling so much he dropped his keys. He knew I knew. But he didn't know what I would do with that knowledge, and that ignorance ate at him. The most important part of revenge isn't the act itself. It's the moment before. The suspense, the dread, the knowledge that something is coming, but not knowing when. I crafted the perfect trap. Slowly, carefully, without rushing. For Clara, it was financial. I began moving our accounts quietly, draining shared assets into places she couldn't touch. She thought she had access, thought she could run to Daniel if needed. But when the day came, she'd find herself with nothing. For Daniel, it was reputation. I planted documents, fabricated just enough evidence to link him to fraud. When whispered in the right ears, it would be enough to ruin him, but I didn't pull the trigger yet. No, I wanted them to squirm first, so I let them live in the illusion. They still met in secret, though less often, always looking over their shoulders. They still lied to me, though with shaky voices, brittle smiles. They still thought they could outsmart me, and I waited, because revenge is like hunting. You don't strike when the prey is calm. You strike when it's panicked, desperate, running out of places to hide. That's when it's most satisfying. Every night, as I lay in bed beside Clara, I listened to her shallow breathing, felt her unease, and I smiled in the dark. She thought she was winning. Daniel thought he was stealing, but neither of them realized. The game had already ended. They just hadn't discovered the checkmate yet. The day I decided to pull the threads, I felt no triumph, only a quiet, clinical satisfaction, like a surgeon about to make a careful incision. The net I'd woven around them had been slow work. Messages saved, accounts siphoned, rumors seeded in the right ears. I had watched them unravel from a distance, seen the panic grow like rot beneath a polished surface. Now the real work began, turning that rot into ruin without ever letting them see the hand that pried the boards from beneath their feet. It started with small public humiliations, the kind that stripped dignity before tearing down the rest. I arranged with careful anonymity for Clara to receive invitations she had never asked for, notes from people she once trusted that hinted at betrayal or mockery. A rumor here about her temper. A casual mention there about how unreliable she'd become. Women who once flocked to her began to falter. They stopped answering her texts. They stopped inviting her to lunches. Where she had once been queen of a small, comfortable court, she became an odd figure people excused with an embarrassed half-laugh. Her face, which I had loved for so long, grew smaller with every slight, as if it were being whittled down by the knives I had placed stealthily in their hands. Parallel to that, I turned my attention to Daniel's world. He had built his fragile empire on charm and borrowed credit. He had always been one misstep away from collapse. I fed the right people whispers about delayed payments, fabricated a misreported invoice here and a supposedly missing contract there. I sent anonymous messages to clients, implied that Daniel's company was unstable, that he had a habit of disappearing at crucial moments. Reputation is a currency, and once I began to spend his, he began to feel poor. Offers dried up. Investors wavered. He grew frantic, making mistakes that confirmed the rumors. I watched his confident facade crack, and every little chip satisfied me in a way fire never could. The night I began to take their access away from the things they thought were theirs felt anticlimactic until the consequences unfolded. I changed account passwords in ways only I could reverse, funneled joint savings into accounts she couldn't find, and moved a few strategic files where they would be discovered at the worst possible moments. I did it carefully. A little transfer here, one misfiled document there, so that when they noticed, they would assume incompetence or bad luck, not a man orchestrating their downfall. Clara found one of the transfers within a week. It showed a suspicious withdrawal that had mysteriously left her paycheck thin. She panicked, confronted me, and I played bewildered. I offered solutions, promised to fix it, all the while letting her flail. Her anger turned inward. The guilt she had been avoiding returned and devoured her from the inside. Daniel felt the financial squeeze with a kind of animal terror that I had always known lived beneath his charm. He reached out to friends, begged for introductions, and made decisions that were increasingly desperate. His phone calls rambled. His excuses were threadbare. He started showing up at my work gatherings just to ask for advice he wouldn't take. I let him. Each time I fed him calm reassurances that somehow encouraged his self-sabotage. To the outside world I remained the same composed man, the stoic husband, the quiet friend, but inside I was always 3 moves ahead, watching as they misread the board. There were moments when the plan required baiting them to prove their guilt publicly. I set up situations where their worst impulses would show. A staged chance photograph of Clara and Daniel together landed in the inbox of a mutual friend with a caption implying a pattern of meetings. The friend, horrified, pulled back from Clara. She sought refuge in other alliances, but everywhere she turned there was a cautious step away. It didn't matter that the photo was grainy, that explanations could be proffered. Shame is a faster killer than truth. It moves like a contagion because people want to avoid being tainted by association. That was my lever. People's fear of scandal. Then there was the moment I engineered to unmask them to someone who had loved me from the beginning. I found a way to put a single, undeniable piece of evidence where it would cause maximum collapse. A printed message from Clara to Daniel that left nothing to interpretation, left no room for plausible deniability. I sent it to my sister, the only family member I'd allowed into the secret, asking her to read it and decide if I had been blind or if she had been monstrous. When she read it, she didn't call me immediately. She let silence do its work. A few days later, she invited Clara for coffee to talk. Clara arrived bright, nervous, smug, the way she had been when she believed herself wearing armor. By the time she left that meeting, her smile was gone. The sister had not lectured. She had shown the message. Friends who once offered sympathy vanished. The network of comfortable bishops and pawns around Clara dissolved into ice-cold distance. Watching her try to recalibrate her face into civility while people cut her off was delicious in its own merciless way. I was not cruel in a brute sense. That would have been messy and backward. My cruelty had to be elegant, surgical. It had to take away everything she relied on until she could not distinguish the bottom of the pit. So I tightened finances further. I called creditors disguised as a cousin. I asked about terms and accidental late fees and how quickly a small overdraft could snowball. I did not lie. I merely asked questions that would set things in motion. The bank flagged her account for review. A small alert, a tiny footnote on a ledger, enough to start a cascade. She called me frantic in the middle of the night one time, voice breaking, asking how we could fix this. I listened like a man who had all the time in the world and offered to help. I offered to take care of it. The irony tasted like poison and sweet sugar together. The best part of what I did was watching how fear rewired them. Clara, once confident and predatory, started to second-guess every embrace, every whisper. She apologized suddenly for things she'd never apologized for before. Her flirtations with Daniel grew more secretive, more furtive, as if shame had become a cloak she could never remove. He, on the other hand, became reckless. When a man thinks he has nothing left to lose, he either turns inward or explodes outward. Daniel exploded. He drank, he gambled, he made a proposal that fell apart because of a phone call I had arranged through a proxy. His temper got him fired from a client meeting where he snapped over what he thought were lies about a contract. That was one of the moments I felt real pity for him. Not because he lost his job, but because his downfall was so predictably simple. It is one thing to plan the steps. It is another thing to anticipate human nature enough to know how they will react. I knew Clara well. I knew Daniel even better. So I kept their reactions predictable. Throw shame at Clara in social places where she sought validation. Strike at Daniel's pride in rooms where he felt he was king. I sent them letters under fake names, small gestures of menace, a bouquet with no card, a letter that said only, "I know," It was theater, and theater works because people buy their own illusions. They began to live within a perimeter of fear I had drawn without stepping foot in the space. They were trapped by their own imaginations. I could have made this about vengeance alone, but I wanted confession more than spectacle. I wanted to see them strip themselves of the disguises that had made them dangerous. So I constructed an encounter that would force the truth into the open, not through evidence but through human frailty. I called a meeting at a local bar we used to frequent, and I made sure they both came. Daniel, drunk on nerves, could not resist. Clara, sensing some semblance of regained control, also came. I sat at a corner table and watched them as if I were a stranger observing two animals fight over the last scraps. I said nothing as they moved through their performance. I let them believe they were still playing me. Then I let silence press. Silence is a magnifying glass. It concentrates embarrassment. It turns guilt up to unbearable heat. When Daniel stumbled into his confession, slurred, too true, thinking he was telling it to a wall, the room became a pressure cooker. He boasted in his unctuous way about some romantic night he had had with Clara, about the thrill of being chosen over the comfortable life I provided. People around us turned their heads. A young man at the next table made a face. A woman covered her child's ears. The theater I had staged began to hum with an audience that now knew something unsavory about the couple. Clara tried to laugh it off, and in doing so her voice betrayed her. In the flicker of that moment, the conversation unwound. A waitress recognized Daniel's face from an invoice he had put forth at work and murmured something. Another person I had quietly fed a photo to earlier looked up, recognition dawning. It was not the kind of explosive revelation I had seen in movies. It was worse, a slow unpeeling, a series of social tics that left them naked. The aftermath was immediate. Clients who had once deferred to Daniel began pulling back, citing awkwardness over the rumors. An invitation was rescinded in a text that made no attempt to be kind. Clara received a message from her mother, painfully brief, legally distant, suggesting she take some time apart. The small things accumulated into a mountain. They reassessed who they were and found little left that was safe. There was one final act I had planned, not a bloody climax, not a public shaming that would force them onto the evening news, but a private, irrevocable collapse that would leave them with nothing but the echo of what they had once tossed aside. I had prepared a document, surgically assembled from their own words, their own receipts, their own confessions. It was a ledger of betrayals and debts. I leaked it with a whisper of context to a lawyer friend who appreciated irony. The legal wheels ground, and soon questions were raised about Daniel's business, and the bank asked Clara to account for certain transactions. That is how respect and stability vanish, not with fanfare, but with a bureaucratic knock. When they finally turned on each other, it was not with the dramatic accusation one sees in novels. They turned inward, stabbing for blame in the darkness. Clara screamed once, a high, raw sound that had me standing at the bedroom doorway, listening like a judge. Daniel lashed out, blaming the world, the sudden change in his fortunes, in a tone I'd never heard before. Petulant, small. They became creatures of accusation because it was easier than admitting they had been selfish and cowardly. The truth, that they had chosen each other over me, over vows and friendship, was too heavy to bear. So they made each other scapegoats. I could have finished them there, but mercy has its own perverse uses. I let them live. I let them sleep in the house we had built, though the furniture felt like a museum, and every cushion contained the shape of an accusation. I let them go to work and encounter the sideways glances of people who knew nothing yet suspected everything. I watched Clara stand in our kitchen one morning, clutching a mug as if it were an anchor, and say to me quietly, "What did I do to deserve this?" The question was so banal, so naked in its denial, I almost laughed. Instead, I smiled like a man who had never wanted to hurt anyone. "You made your choices," I said. "You decided what you wanted. You knew the stakes. She looked at me like someone seeing a stranger. In her eyes was fear, not for what she had lost materially, but for the small, tender parts of herself that had been consumed by the hunger she had fed. Daniel left town within a month, removed by scandal and debt. He called twice in the first week, begging for help I never offered. He promised to make amends, to fix things, to come back. I listened, the way one listens to a man offering a useless apology after he has broken something irretrievable. The calls stopped. When they resumed months later, they came from numbers I did not recognize anymore. As for Clara, she stayed, but she was hollowed. She walked through rooms like a woman in a house of mirrors, each reflection distorting her until she did not recognize any single angle as truth. People avoided her. People who had once vied for her approval now excused themselves from her life. That social exile is worse than prison because it is self-imposed and inescapable. Her pleas for compassion fell on faces that had already filled with doubt. She began to speak of the past like a cautionary tale, as if warning juniors at work about choices. No one invited her to the dinners she used to host. Sometimes, months later, I would see them from afar. Daniel, gaunt and thinner, his charm curdled into something brittle. Clara, older by the pale lines worry draws, moving through a world that had no patience for her petty dramas. They had not been murdered, not physically destroyed, but what I had done was worse in certain ways. I had removed the scaffolding of their lives. Without their network, their reputations, their financial ballast, they were left to drift in a cold current. There were nights when I caught myself wondering if I had gone too far. If my appetite for justice had hollowed me into another man they would have hated. Revenge is a mirror. You must be careful what you become while you shatter someone else. I would lie awake and run these questions like a blade under my tongue, testing the edge. But then I would remember the look on Clara's face in that room the night I caught them. The way Daniel had smirked like a man who had won by being dishonest. The memory hardened me. It justified the calculus I had performed. In the end, the most satisfying part was not that they feared me every moment of every day. It was the slow comprehension that came years later when they realized that nothing they had done could be undone. Time does not heal every wound. Sometimes it deepens the scar into a map of decisions. Their fear turned into regret, and regret is a quiet, poisonous companion that never forgives. They learned to live within its narrow borders, to measure their days by small, cautious steps. When people ask me now if I regret what I did, I tell them the truth. I regret the man I had been when I loved blindly, and I regret having trusted the wrong people with the fragile thing that was my life. But I do not regret making sure they understood the weight of their choices. Justice, I found, was not about delivering a sentence in the open light, but rather about rebalancing the ledger in a way that left them with a daily private torment. I did not want their blood. I wanted them to learn the language of loss. So they both fear me. Not because I haunt them, not because I stalk their nights, but because they see in me what they might have been had they not made those choices. In the mirror of their ruined lives, my silhouette is the one constant, the quiet, patient man who watched and then acted. That is the kind of fear that lingers. It does not scream, it waits,